So Phoebe, you and I know each other pretty well, and we've been competitors, but also partners in our dynamic industry, the aerospace and defense industry. But all these great folks out here probably don't know a lot about you, so could you give us just a little bit of a background and how you got into the aerospace and defense industry?
So I was raised as an Air Force child, spent the majority of my childhood in Europe during the Cold War. And it really gave you a sense of both being an American and the potential threats to America. So I think I was naturally drawn to national security. I don't think the military was for me because I didn't do so well with the rule thing. And there's a lot of structure in the military that probably I would have probably suffered under. So I looked for other ways to serve. And one of them was in the CIA, and again, it was the height of the Cold War. So you really have a sense of, enemies at the gate. But then all that I've done throughout my career has really been from different approaches to national security, both through the government and then in the private sector. And both of our companies spend an awful lot of time. I mean, our raison d'etre is national security and how do we keep our troops safe and how do we contribute to the common defense. So sort of my journey. It's a little bit iconoclastic, I think, by many people's standards. I didn't grow up in the defense industry. I'm not an engineer. You want to talk a little bit about diversity? I think diversity of thought is key. And if you're a liberal arts major and the only one in the room frequently surrounded by engineers, that's diversity. So I think it was a little more circuitous a route, but as you all know, these jobs are jobs of enormous privilege and obligation, and so I know we all work very hard to really create the ultimate value, the best value that we can.
Phoebe, besides the commonality we have in being CEOs of some great companies, we also have some other commonality, and that's in our parents. Phoebe's parents, father immigrated from Serbia, and my parents immigrated from, you probably can guess, from this little island called Ireland. And maybe just kind of talk about that and how that set your perspective in life moving forward.
So I think when you're a child of an immigrant, in particular, my father survived World War II as a child. He came to the United States at 17. While he spoke 7 languages, English was not one of them, and he had $25 in his pocket. And we all were educated, and he achieved by working hard. And I think that's what we learned, is the possibility of the opportunities afforded to us by hard work in this country. Where else could a kid from Serbia do as well as he did? So I think we had I grew up with a sense of obligation to this nation, because with these great gifts, much is expected from us. And I've lived enough around other parts of the world that you can really see that we are an exceptional nation, not just because of the natural resources and the wealth, but our system of government and our managed capitalism is I think all very wholesome to the human spirit, and that's really what it's about. We can optimize our human spirit both as one and as a many. So I think it informed a lot of how I see the world, and I'm fiercely patriotic. I'm proud of that. I think we need to have more of a national dialogue about the importance of patriotism and shared values. So I'm not shy about it.
And Phoebe and I travel around the world, and she's absolutely correct. It's the only place in the world where children of immigrants could come and essentially run these major big companies. I mean, how about a round of applause to the United States of America?
Yeah.
Phoebe, General Dynamics is a great company, and could you just tell us some of the things you're doing in New England, and some of the folks may not be familiar with all the solutions you provide. Number one, to our great nation, and to also CEOs, so they can get their job done. Maybe.
So he's referring to, we also, in addition to manufacturing engineering and designing defense platforms and weapon systems, we also make Gulfstream airplanes. So that is a tool for American business in terms of efficiency. So that we do down in Georgia, but here we have several thousand employees in the Boston area, and then we'll end up with about 20 to 25,000 down in Groton, Connecticut, and Quonset Point, Rhode Island, where we manufacture nuclear submarines. So we have a deep and rich history in New England, and we've always found it a good home, a business-friendly home for the most part, and we've found a good talent base. You know, we're growing. The manufacturing and really its construction of submarines is a labor-intensive business, and we need a lot of touch labor, and these are very high-end blue-collar jobs, from plumbers, electricians, pipe fitters, welders. Welders is a key skill, and about 8 years ago we started working with the states, to my point about states being supportive, with Rhode Island, Connecticut, and a little bit in Massachusetts on training programs. You know, what I used to, when we were growing up, they were trade schools. Well, they got a new name, community colleges. But, you know, I said to the governor of one of the states, you guys need to stop producing bartenders and barbers, and we need electricians and plumbers. Yeah. And we need them fast. And so as a result of that cooperation and really public-private partnerships and training, we are going to hire a lot of high-paying, really career-long jobs for working people. And I feel pretty good and pretty excited about that, but none of that would be possible without the states.
So how, and I'm going to rob some of your secrets on this question, how are you dealing with the fact that the labor market is getting so tight, and you have a big company, you have folks that are retiring, so you got to fill their jobs, you have the normal attrition you got to fill, and then you're growing, and so how are you dealing with all that?
Well, it's sort of a nice, rich problem to have if you're growing. You know, managing companies in a declining market has its own particular skill set that isn't always fun to execute. But we are growing. We can talk about that a little bit, about why the defense industry is in fact growing. But we have found that the attraction of talent is really geographically based. Tom and I were talking a little bit at lunch that people tend to want to stick closer to home. You can get some people who have a wanderlust, but many folks want to stay closer to family. And so the key is to ensure that the locales in which you reside have enough of a labor base to draw from. And we've been pretty fortunate in that regard. In this area, it's a talent-rich environment. And so then we just compete with others for that same talent. And so how does a company compete? I think for most people, yeah, the job matters, the quality of the job matters, but the culture of a company also matters deeply, because you want to be in a company where you're not only doing good things, but you're kind of having fun when you do it. You know, I think happiness in the workforce is underrated, in the workplace is underrated. You know, if you have happy employees, they're really doing good work. And so we try to foster an environment that is, you know, you're not sitting around, you know, singing Kumbaya all the time, but you are trying to have some fun. You know, laugh every once in a while. It's good tonic for the soul. So while these seem sort of esoteric characteristics and people don't really talk about it, I think if you build a company with a good culture where the employees are happy to be, you know, they're happy to work there, they're going to be your best messengers, right? They're going to get their friends and families and kids to come work for the company. And it works. Not always. Hard to get, you know, really nuclear engineers because, you know, they want to come and be happy. But you know, I think there's something to be said about all of that.
So, Phoebe, Warren talked a little bit about diversity and inclusion, and we have a great book that is being shared with us, so thank you very much. And our industry, folks that would not think about diversity and inclusion in the aerospace and defense industry. But it turns out the CEOs from actually a majority now of our defense companies, including Phoebe, are women.
You're in a minority, Tom.
And in fact, the Fortune magazine said I was the last man standing. I guess, but I can tell you I'm the last man sitting right now. But, But, could you just, I mean, it is amazing. And it's not just on the employee side and in the management positions, it's also on our boards. Do you want to maybe share with the folks in the room why you think that is and why our industry has
Why
been,
our industry, it is actually true. And I've thought about this because is there something systemic about the defense industry that would suggest that you should get the level of diversity that we have throughout our ranks? And the answer is no, not necessarily, but I think one of the things that drove us to be early adopters, if you want to think about it in those terms, is the military was integrated far faster than the rest of society. And I think that when your customer looks a certain way, we look a certain way. And I think that really drove that sense of inclusion. The military is a meritocracy, and people of all color and increasingly different genders have been able to excel because it is a meritocracy. And we mirror that. So I think that informed some of the cultures early on of these companies. And I think too, my reason for wanting to come into this industry was really to serve my country in a way that I could. And for women, perhaps some of the opportunities weren't always available for service. I also like to make things. And the steel industry at the time wasn't very interested in me when I got out of business school. So this was perfect for me because it was doing a mission that I thought was important, and it was making stuff, which I think is just super cool. So I suspect that we had some opportunities, but all driven in part because I think our military customer had diversified, had a greater inclusion than maybe society is at large. So I'm guessing that's some sociologists will debunk that and think I'm full of it. But I think that, that's at least my thoughts hole.
So just so folks don't think that it was a slam dunk, can you just share some of the obstacles that you had in your career and moving through the government, the CIA? She tells you about the CIA. There's a gentleman in the back that'll clear your brain before you leave the room.
Yeah.
But in any case, can you just share with us the obstacles you faced and how you overcame them in your career?
I think as human beings, the key to a successful life is determination, relentless determination. You never, never, never give up. Irrespective of your gender, your color, where you're from, you just never give up. And I think that mental fortitude, stood all of us in relatively good shape. I was thinking about this earlier today for reasons. When I got out of business school, I wanted to go work for a steel company. And I happened to be 7 months pregnant. So I walked into my interview, and I think it was the world's fastest interview. In about 30 seconds, we're not hiring. And I got the message, we're not hiring you. So, you kind of, you can't let that stuff get you down. All right, fine, I'll get over this condition and live to thrive. I think some of it is fortitude. I think some of it is also a compassion and empathy. Sometimes when I've experienced people who they've been off-put by me, and by the way, my gender is the last place I go. I'll assume that if I put someone off or someone ill at ease, that I hold the mirror up to myself first and see if I've done something to put them off. And if all my other options have failed, I'll go to gender. But sometimes what I've observed is people can be threatened. If it's a woman coming into an all-man's world, that can be a little threatening. And so I think if you meet people with compassion and understanding and a fair amount of tolerance, and you work hard and you're determined over time, you win them over. They're compelled to be a part of whatever team you're a part of. Men will follow women. Men will follow women, and they'll work with women if they believe that you are as committed, as tough, as relentless. And by the way, as I have always put the team above self, and I think that can be very affirming to others. So sometimes that can break down barriers. if you've been advocating something outside of your own space, sometimes I think people can say, okay, maybe she's for real, and it isn't just the girl thing. I mean, I got plenty of promotions where I'm sure they said, she got it because she's a girl. Well, maybe. But I'm going to work hard enough to prove that I'm good at it.
So how do you bring up the next generation of women in the business? What do you think we have to do as CEOs of companies, as business managers of companies? What aren't we doing that we need to do? Is there anything we aren't doing, or we just got to keep doing what we've been doing?
I think a lot about bringing up all of the people with us. I think mentoring is gender blind. I think it is color blind. It should be sexual preference blind. And what I want to be able to do is, and with my generation of leaders now, I mean, in my company, we talk an awful lot about let's make sure that that next generation who's going to take over from us is ready and they're better. That's our legacy. That is part of what to create real long-term shareholder value, that's how we do it. Get those kids ready. And whether they're male or female or whoever they are, wherever they are, meet them where they are and make sure they're better than we are. I mean, those are explicit conversations. I hope to heck, my successor's better than me, because I have a lot of money still in the company. But we really do think about that as just human beings and what we can do. Make sure that, by the way, from a practical matter, so sort of esoteric, but on a practical matter, that when we go advertise for jobs, we have a diverse and full slate. And including males, there's some places where, your average white male is not in the consist. So are we being exclusive? That's no good either. Inclusion means that of all people, in my mind. So.
Well, thank you for that. That was great. So.
A Sermon on the Mount, sort of. I mean, we started with St. Ignatius, so we can continue.
So, Phoebe, in addition to conquering diversity and inclusion in your business, you also run a big business. I mean, you build ships. We already talked about business jets, some of the best business jets in the world. It's a sign of privilege to have.
Actually, the best business jets. Let's be clear in our language.
Best business jets in the world. And then you also, the ships, the planes, and all your other systems that you do. But bottom line, it's a very complex business, and submarines. So how do you manage it? How do you allow your business leaders to accomplish what they need to accomplish, but at the same time, keep your thumb on the pulse of what's going on in the business?
So, given that I'm a big believer in culture, it'll come no surprise to you that we have a very strong corporate ethos, and I use the word ethos intentionally because it's a stronger word than ethic. It means your fundamental moral character. And so we talk a lot about at the senior leadership team level and then all the way through the business what that ethos is. And the reason that's important is because culture undergirds everything you do. It's the personality of an organization. And so part of that culture is, part of that ethos is alignment, transparency, honesty, and trust. And that transparency is critical. Because the way we manage is we push decisions down to the lowest competent decision-making level. I like that because it drives agility. And what does agility mean? It's a fancy word that people use without it having any real import or at least common parlance. In my mind, agility is quick, accurate decision-making. And I believe that is best done at the tactical level when the folks executing that understand what's expected of them because of this corporate culture, and the commander's intent is clear, to use our customer's lexicon. So I spent a lot of time proselytizing on what my intent is, what my mission is in the moment, and then I expect those who are in the field, who are best equipped to fight their particular battle, to execute accordingly. And so there is a fair amount of decentralization. Transparency is critical in that, because if somebody gets themselves in a bit of a pickle, they better be quickly raising their hand and telling me they're in trouble, because then we're at headquarters and we're here to help. But that's exactly what we do. You know, if there's a problem, then we go fix it. But if people are fighting their war well and hitting their objectives, then we let them go and let them run.
Great. And switching a gear a little bit over here is our defense industry supports our men and women in uniform so they can do their mission and come home safely. But to provide them those type of solutions that they need, the industry relies on the best technology that is available. And technology is changing quite a bit. How do you, running General Dynamics, ensure that General Dynamics is able to take on that technology and deliver those solutions to our men and women in uniform?
So what you want to make sure of is that you don't miss a big trend. That would be my idea of a nightmare. So we ensure as an entity that we look out and see what technologies and technology applications we could apply to the platforms, the systems that we have. But again, I think by pushing decision-making down to the lowest level, we get a lot of partnerships with small companies and universities that help keep us current and keep us in the game to the extent that we can offer the latest technology to our customers when they can figure out how to use it. You know, some of this is, people say, well, we have AI in the warfighting realm. The U.S. military has yet to figure out how to use AI. But there are places we can help them, not in the actual conduct of hostilities, but there are places where we can help apply AI. I'm thinking logistics, for example. We use AI to be predictive about Gulfstream airplanes and reliability and service on Gulfstream airplanes. Wouldn't that be amazing if we could use that same AI to be predictive about the experience of our platforms in ground combat? And we do the main battle tank for the United States. We manufacture multiple combat vehicles and strikers. How superb would that be if we could then identify a priori the kinds of problems they were going to have and then have those parts there on time so that they're not out of mission? That increases the capability of our military, and by the way, reduces the large logistical trail that has to go with them. So it's ways like that that I think, you know, part of my job is, I don't always understand, you would understand much better the elements of the technology, but I ought to be pretty good at figuring out how to use it. Okay, now how can you use it? Yeah, that's cool, but so what? It's only interesting for us if it's a so what. It has to be actualized. So we try.
Let me switch gears one more time here into an area that I know you and I have had discussions about this. We've been in meetings with other folks and have discussions about it, and it's a topic of cybersecurity. And we, both of our businesses, one of our jobs is we have to protect the secrets of the nation. We need to make sure that none of those get out. So being able to protect those and the element of cybersecurity is ultimately, you know, very, very important and critical to our business. I mean, we've been dealing with this for, I know you have, and I have about 20 years in our businesses and fending off
I think way ahead of the rest of American industry. I remember hearing some CEOs talk about, cyber's not a problem for me. You guys are paranoid. Well, it was a problem, and that's how we've experienced the IP theft we've seen over the last 15 to 20 years.
So maybe just share with folks how you've been dealing with that at General Dynamics and how you treat it now as a.
So I think by nature, given both our customer and given the type of work that our companies do, we tend to be very security conscious, and cyber is just another element of security on the very, very high end. So clearly it's important to produce, to build moats around your business, to ensure that you build robust cyber systems so that you can reduce hacking, reduce malware, and reduce theft. I worry an awful lot about the cyber threat from the inside. Mm-hmm. I think insider threats can be a significant problem for companies. And as a leader, there's an important juxtaposition and balance between ensuring that you have proper security and that you do not violate people's civil liberties, or that you build a police state in which everybody's afraid to do something because they're afraid their neighbor's gonna turn them in. So it's finding that balance where you see something, say something, without creating the tattletale mentality that rips human institutions apart. So we spend an awful lot of time talking about internal insider threats and help people who you think may be at risk. I worry more about it's the Snowdens of the world who do more damage than, that was scary.
Right, exactly.
He's a bad guy.
And I know we as an industry, we work together on our supply chain, because that's what has happened. And maybe you can give us some insights into your business also. But since the companies themselves have done a great job in protecting themselves from cybersecurity, where we see the threat is actually a lot of it coming in through our supply chain. And you have a big supply chain. So maybe just a couple things about how you ensure.
So our supply chain is more vulnerable, and I think part of our responsibility is to particularly smaller businesses, they can't afford to put a very expensive cyber protection program in place. So the extent that we have to offer them the umbrella of our protection, we can do that in some instances. Some of it's just awareness and training. So we have to spend a fair amount of time on that as well. But it is a real challenge. It's a real challenge for all of us. It's the safety of our suppliers, the reliability, not just typically you're looking at things like quality, cost, schedule. And now you also need to think about, and how secure are they? Because the bad guys will go for the most vulnerable link. Find the weak flank, right? And the supply chain can be the weak flank, and folks who are our potential enemies are not stupid. So find the Achilles heel, go for it. So we're spending increasingly amount of time. By the way, the other thing, and I think it's important people understand, our industry has a level of comity to it, not comedy, although that on occasion happens, comity, so that we tend to share lessons learned and practices among ourselves more than I think a fair number of industries. So for example, if we see a particular cyber attack, we tell our customer, and our customer disseminates it to Raytheon and Lockheed Martin and everyone else, so we can all have there's nothing stronger than a common defense. And if we can all be aligned in that common defense, it's a big help. So I'm a big believer in industry cooperation. You have to sometimes put down your, you have to worry a little less about the competitive aspects of some of this and more about how can we protect ourselves and make it strong.
The CISOs from our companies, they've memorized the number of phone numbers for their peers, and they do share the information. That's I think in the area of cybersecurity especially, we do definitely work together very well as an industry. Well, Phoebe, we're getting close to opening it up for Q&A, but I'd just like to open up the floor to you. And is there one element of leadership that you would like to kind of just share with the team that you probably practice day in and day out, almost automatically now?
I think leaders have to live the creed that they preach. So I try very hard to live up to the value systems that I've promulgated. I think too, a good leader has that strength of character. They have that persistence. They also have great humanity and compassion. When you have the privilege of leading people, you have to understand that we are people with feelings, vulnerabilities, and insecurities. And understanding where people are, I think I work very hard to make sure that I can't always be nice, but I try to be kind. Sometimes you have to let a lot of people go, and frankly, the first thing I did was let rid of 25% of our corporate officers go, so I don't think they really, it was a little rough, but I tried to be kind and compassionate in all of that. In those very difficult moves, and so I think that's a big part of being a leader, and I think that's how you can inspire loyalty, both to the company and to each other. That's why we all work so hard, because we're all frankly devoted to each other, driven to create shareholder value, and I talk a lot about creating shareholder value just in terms of that being part of our company's fibers.
Right.
By the way, that's a different kind of dialogue that went on in the defense industry maybe 40 years ago. So I think it's all good and wholesome.
I do too. So with that, we'll open up the room to any questions for Phebe. Got one back here. It's just a mic.
I'm Dr. Charles Tupard from Bamboo Global, retired Navy captain. As a sequel to that question, Phebe, what two leadership skills or traits do you find yourself using more often with respect to your customers, your shareholders, and employees?
Well, customers is patience. If you think about who our customer is. I think a leadership skill, or at least that I try to I work on, is to ensure I can think around square corners. I think sometimes chief executives need to see what the art of the possible is before others do. And sometimes that means you think non-linearly, and I don't think in the logical syllogism as a matter of course. So, and then I think too, communication skills are important. I know you know this.
Right.
You want your team to have no ambiguity about what the mission is. You know, you don't want anybody saying, well, I didn't know. Bull, you knew. If you didn't know, you weren't listening. The 400 times I told you. So I think with shareholders, it's understanding. It's being realistic about your own company, what your strengths are, what maybe the perceived weaknesses are, and addressing those forthrightly. I'm a big believer in telling the truth, because without your character and without the trust that really telling the truth engenders, you don't have much. So we'll tell the truth, the good, bad, and the ugly, and I'll admit to shareholders when we may have had a challenge, or we may have, you know, stepped in a bucket and trying to get it off our foot. And then with each other, I think it's treating each other with decency. And there takes a certain amount of mental toughness in these jobs. These jobs are not popularity contests. If they are, you know, don't get them, because you won't be a good leader. You know, sometimes people, it's a happy event if people seem to like you, but I really don't care. I just want them to be passionate about the enterprise and do the right thing at all times with all people. So, hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Have another question, please? Right here. Go ahead.
So from where you sit with such a unique perspective, what do you think are the two top threats to our country right now?
I think that this is probably, I think we have exogenous threats to our country. I think we now have peer or near peer competitors who are not necessarily aligned with our value system or our interests. I see that as a real threat. I worry, as an American, I worry profoundly about our divisiveness as a nation. Democracy requires shared values, and I don't see that we're not having a national narrative about our shared values. There's too much anger and hatred, and frankly, this is a rich nation. Not everybody enjoys in that richness, but almost all of our people live a better standard of living, given the diversity of our nation, than anyone else. We're angry with each other. I worry a lot about the corrosive and cancerous effects of that level of anger and hatred. Some of it's flat out hatred. And that, I think, is scary. You can destroy yourself much faster than an enemy can destroy you. And typically great empires fall from the inside out. So I worry an awful lot about that, at the same time that we've got some serious threats that we also don't have a national dialogue about, and we should.
Any other questions?
Well, maybe I should ask you some questions, given how many people are in the room. I don't think it's for me.
She's a tougher question to ask her than I am. So this is for Phoebe?
This is for Phoebe.
Okay, good. Got it.
So, Gene Wyan, Willis Towers Watson. First, I'd like to thank both of you. My sister recently retired as a colonel in the Army, fought in both Iraq wars, and used both of your products, and you brought her home safe.
Well,
so
thank her for her service.
Thank you very much. But to that end, Phoebe, given that your customer is the U.S. government, and we've talked about global expansion, tell me a little bit about the challenges that your organization is facing with thinking outside of U.S., either selling to other organizations or manufacturing in other countries.
So we, the majority of our manufacturing is in the United States, and the majority of, this is in one way our products differ, but the majority of my products, particularly in shipbuilding, do not export. On some of our land forces businesses, we can export that, but we've had a strategy as a business to set up wholly owned subsidiaries in allied nations. Because the U.S., nations are most successful when they are in coalitions. They have lots of allies. It's always been our strength since we became a world power, is to have allies, and so we have undergirded some of that by having manufacturing facilities and businesses in Canada, the UK, Spain, and Denmark, less so in the Middle East. There's more selling U.S. government to government. We sell to the U.S. government in a sense, and then they transfer the product. So we tend to have strong relationships in the countries of origin where we live, but we are very careful to always support U.S. policy into whom we sell. It'd be unthinkable for one of us to have be selling products to the wrong kind of people, to potential adversaries. We simply wouldn't do it. So, but we find, the flag carries a lot of, our flag carries a lot of heft around the world, and we've done very well in these countries. Again, we tend to bring a lot of technology that they might not otherwise have, to the table. And that same ethos we talked about telling everybody the truth, I think they appreciate that. Yeah. Much the same way we do. So we've tended to have a very good ex-US business.
Any other questions in the room? You have one, one over here.
Going back to your points on AI and some of the divisiveness, would you say that the big Silicon Valley tech companies could do more to help or work with the defense industry?
Yes, and I'm frankly alarmed when I see some companies to whom much is given not want to work with the U.S. government. Who do they think provides them this freedom? Where do they think the platform for their technology innovation comes? It comes from the security and stability of this nation. So I find as an American that a little troubling. That said, there are real opportunities for cooperation, and many of those companies do cooperate. And we have said, and as I know Raytheon has, established some strategic alliances with many of what the Defense Department calls non-traditional suppliers. We're always looking for people with smarter, better ways to do things. And I actually have a business in Silicon Valley. And it's sometimes a little bit challenging to get the workforce there because, we're competing with some really, high-end companies in that regard. But I think it's our jobs, as we were talking about earlier, to canvass throughout the United States and take that rich body of research that we produce as a nation every year and figure out how we can make that work to the benefit of our national security.
Okay, well, maybe one more question. If not, you're seeing. With that, Warren, you want to have a round of applause?
Well, thank you all.